So today we've got our 2011 Yukon, my wife's daily driver. Replaced the front struts on it a couple weeks ago. It's got the active ride on it, so the magnetic fluid shocks. And have a clunk noise coming out of this side for sure, and also on the other side. And I have a suspicion as to what it is, because I tried tightening the nut at the top that holds the shock strut in place, and it still makes a noise. When I get the nut off of here, I'll show you what I'm talking about. And I've got the old shock sitting in the back. So you can see down here, we've got the auto ride plugged in on the top, and then the shock absorber piston and the mount coming through the top there. We got to remove that connector here first, and then we're gonna get down to the main nut that holds everything on there. There's actually a second nut that's on the top of this that has the fitting for the sensor connector to get plugged into the top of the auto ride there. You got to take that nut off first, and then the mounting nut is below that. So the nut that the connector plugs into is a 18 millimeter. We use a deep well socket to get at that, have enough room to get down to the hex head on there. Should not be torqued on too tight, so just got to get that broken off of there. If it doesn't want to break loose, then you can use an impact wrench, but make sure you're not over tightening it if you accidentally try to tighten it on there, because you can break these strut pistons off pretty easily by over torquing them. We're going to use the impact wrench in this one. So here's what that fitting nut looks like on top of there. You can see the barb at the top of this, the feature on here that holds the connector on once it's seated. Next up, we're going to remove the nut that actually holds the piston to the top of the strut tower. The strut in place right now. As you can see, it's pretty long on here where that sensor shaft comes up through, and I can't get a deep well on there. So one of these, just a standard offset wrench here. On the aftermarket replacement nut that's on there, it's a 19 millimeter. I just put this on here and I tightened it up a week ago, and as you can see, it's already loose. And you might be able to see that the whole shaft itself is moving there. I know for a fact that this is tightened as far as it'll go before obviously breaking anything. So once we get this nut off of here, I'll compare it to the original and explain to you why this nut here isn't securing it good enough. Well, had to bust out the old impact gun and just barely slipped on the socket enough that I could get down in there. This guy was seized right up on the strut shaft. And you know what'll happen is if you got something that's vibrating, clunking like that for an extended period, and the roads in this area are horrible, even though it's only been like this a couple weeks. She was seized right up on there, and I couldn't get it off by holding onto the top of the piston. All right, let's compare the nuts. So this is the one on the left there that came off from the aftermarket replacement. And I've had these guys sitting around in the barn ever since I took them off the truck a couple weeks ago. As you can see, there's my leaky one there. This one's probably still good, but 130,000 miles on it. Not really worth saving. So these will end up staying underneath my air compressor for the next probably 3 years, and I'll decide to throw them out at some point. Take them to the scrapyard, get maybe 10 cents for them. But anyways, got the OEM nut off of there. Now, if I were a betting man, I would say the OEM nut is designed differently than the replacement. The key difference is you can see inside the OEM nut, there's a non-threaded area, and you've actually got clearance around where that piston shaft comes up and through. On the replacement, it's just a standard nylon locking nut. And the threads go right down. So if you think about how these mount up to the top of the strut, you've got basically you're engaging the threads up higher on the shaft. Not only does that make it easier to get the strut off with an impact wrench, because you can get a socket over top of that and not have to just barely put the ratchet input into that in order to get it off, but it also engages the threads, so you're not locking up on the threads like this guy, as opposed to actually locking up on the strut tower or the hat that's at the top of the strut. Let me show you on these. Yeah, I'm already pulling them out from when I was thinking they were going to sit there for 6 years. Here's the original strut there. There's that feature that comes through that basically that the sensor plugs in down through that hole. When this guy is on the shaft, it goes all the way down here. So basically you're running this guy all the way down to the end of the thread there. You're not squeezing this area here with the strut hat. When you put on the OEM nut, it's basically going over top of that sleeve. The sleeve is going over top of the shaft right there, and you're engaging this entire area here. In fact, you can see where this guy ended up, because that corrosion up there, it was probably in the truck about this far down. This guy runs all the way down, stops right there, and that's where your movement happens, because your strut hat is not being compressed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the OEM ones back on. These are also nylock up on the top there, a little rusty, but I'm going to put that back on, and I'm willing to bet that's going to solve our problem. Actually, when you look at it, not sure if it's clear on the camera or not, but the shank, where there's no thread on the shaft coming through, is actually up through the hat, probably a good 1 or 2 millimeters there. So I am 100% certain that that thing was rattling around in there, because that other nut was not holding on tight. So you don't want to torque that guy on too hard either, but got the connector mount there. We'll get the connector put back on here. Make sure you hear it click, just do a little pull on it there. And there we go. She is all set. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. The other side, we got this hybrid power unit, power distributor here in the way. So I'm going to have to take the tire off and do that from the outside through the fender well. But same kind of thing going on the other side, I have to believe. Going to replace that with the OEM nut, and we'll take it for a test drive here when that is all wrapped up. As I'm getting this tire pulled off, I'm going to share my philosophy on why I like to work on my own cars. So this is a 2011. We bought it with about 65,000 miles on it, probably 5 or 6 years ago. It's been a good truck, and we do a lot of towing with it in the summertime. Got a 25, 27 foot travel trailer, and even with the hybrid, she pulls just fine. Gets the kids around town real nice. Also great with towing. The nice thing about this transmission in here is that it does not shift at all. It's really like a CVT transmission. So what that means is the hybrid engine, the gasoline engine, drives an electric motor actually 2 electric motors in the transmission. There's no torque converter on this. No torque converter on this because those 2 electric motors work basically like a torque converter in the CVT transmission. Now, in some cases, there is actually a standard 4-gear automatic transmission that's coupled with the hybrid transmission. And if you're going downhill, especially when towing, or you want to leave it in manual mode like a standard truck, you can leave it in manual mode, and it basically uses the standard 4-gear transmission. Safety first. Got to go get a jack stand underneath there. Someday I'll get a lift. Before I get a lift, I probably need a barn that's got a 14-foot ceiling on it, but oh well, I like rolling around in the oil out here anyways. So on the philosophy, I like to work on my own cars because not only do you save money, you learn a lot by working on your own cars. And, you know, you may have a car payment on a used car even, couple hundred bucks a month. Once you pay that off, you own it. And what's another, you know, $300 to $500 a year potentially in maintenance to keep it running? Many times, you know, there's small things that happen here and there, and out of convenience, people will get rid of their used vehicles and go ahead right back into another $300 to $400 a month car payment, and they just keep that cycle going. If you're going to do this yourself, replace your shocks or repair anything like that, you definitely want to get a set of these offset wrenches here. Don't even waste your time trying to get a regular box wrench down in there, because you're just going to frustrate yourself, and then you're going to end up having to buy some of these anyways and wait a couple days for them to ship to you, or if you can find them at a local hardware store, great. It helps if I use the right side of the wrench. On this side, she is pretty well tight on there, so that's a good thing. Probably wasn't rattling as much on this side, but since I'm in here, I'm going to go ahead and replace that nut anyways. Almost forgot. Good thing I didn't forget. I had this other jack stand out here because as soon as that thing comes loose, he's going to want to let right go. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to compress the suspension just a little bit there to keep that strut from popping out as this thing is loosening up here. So we want to get just a little bit of weight down. There we go. Get a little bit of weight down on the system there. That way the strut doesn't want to pop right out of here when we're taking her off. Thought it was odd that piston coming through there was staying stationary, but the piston was bound up inside because of the weight of the suspension and the spring pushing down on it. If someone could invent a ratcheting offset wrench that can fit down into the smallest little wells of nuts and bolts, that would be appreciated, because this is taking too long. Actually, kind of a nice day today. Wraps that one up.